All right, guys. So here we are in my office where I do a lot of my drawing. I'm going to walk you through kind of the step-by-step process here, but wanted to start out by pointing out a few of the tools that I use. Most of it's pretty standard stuff for an artist here. I have two different sizes of rulers. Really, it's just for being able to reach large portions of my paper that I use, while also having a smaller one here if I need to grab it for some short measurements. Two different kinds of pencils. I normally use a 5H artist pencil because it draws really light. It's got a really hard lead. It draws really light and it's easy to erase. But today I'll be doing most of my pencil sketching with just a regular number 2 pencil that has been chewed up by my daughter, but aptly says, write the happy, erase the crappy. So I'll use this because this darker lead shows up a little better on camera than the lighter lead does. And until we get into inking, we'll need to be able to see what it is that I'm drawing. I have my sharpener here for obvious reasons. Just a regular artist gum eraser here. I like the large erasers. The drawing pencils don't normally come with an eraser on the end, and the number 2 pencils, their erasers are fairly short and soft, and they wear down very easily. So I like to have a couple of these on hand because they are an artist's best friend. I also use a compass, normally for drawing out regular distances, 100 yards, 200 yards, things like that, so I can keep a good mind of how far my shots are going, where I'm going to put a landing zone. A 300-yard shot to the left is going to be different than a 300-yard shot to the right, so I like to know where those shots could potentially play for putting down fairways or hazards or anything like that. For my inking, what I use are some Master's Touch Fine Art Studio needle drawing pens. I think I picked these up at Michael's or maybe Hobby Lobby. They come in a set of 3. I only use really the 0.5 and the 0.1. I use the 0.5 for a lot of my basic tracing of my sketch lines, and then I'll use the 0.1 for a lot of the detail work, some of the contouring, hatching, and things of that nature. But the 0.5 works, basically just the same. I do also keep a Sharpie on hand. Really, it's for drawing out the final title. There may be some shadow work that I do that I'll use a Sharpie for, but I usually stay away from the Sharpie. One, because it's got a pretty thick tip, and I don't like to put a lot of thick lines around the finer inking lines that I have. But it does have its uses. And finally, I just have, again, these are Master's Touch. I think I got them at the same time I got my pens. They came in a set of 24 different markers. But these are nice because they have a medium tip for a lot of the larger coloring and also a fine tip. They're not the greatest markers in terms of bleed and color coverage. When you color with them, you do get a lot of darkening where the colors overlap. I mean, that happens with most markers anyway. It really just comes down to the wetness and the saturation of the ink. But I really like to use them for their fine lining, for some detail work. In these drawings that I've been doing so far, I've really only been using them to color in my T markers that I have, but also to use the red to show different types of shots and how to play those. So I'll clear off my board here. I will say this is the first time that I am recording a video of me drawing, so I have a little jerry-rig setup here where I'm recording on my phone from an overhead view, and then I'm recording my voice through my computer. So hopefully we can get these two things to sync up in post whenever I go to edit this video, and everything comes together. But hopefully there's no focusing issues or being able to see the lines that I'm drawing. I normally pencil in fairly light, But for these purposes, I'll try to do a little darker, and we may just have some darker pencil lines on the final hole. So that's okay. So first and foremost, this is for my National Treasure course. I received the country of Chile. And so, if you've been following any of my Twitter posts or my forum posts, although I haven't updated my forum posts yet with my completed holes, I do have the completed layout, potential completed layout of my course so far. Basic concept is this is on just a small little parcel of land near the coastline. As you can see, we're looking north here. So if I want to hold it how we'd be really looking at a map, this is kind of an area of Chile that comes out to the west a little bit and then dips down south. So the major area of the Pacific Ocean is actually over on this side, and then it would kind of carry back up this way. So when you see this, you'll see my prevailing winds that I have are to the northeast. They're coming off the ocean and pushing in towards the mountains there. So I use this when I begin each hole just to give myself a reference of what I've already laid out for myself. I find it much easier to do this to reference a large plan rather than designing 18 separate holes and then trying to piece them together like a puzzle and make them work. A lot of times I have done that in the past, and then I've gotten into the designer and I've found that my elevation changes that I've put in for myself don't match up. I'll have one hole, ending 25 feet down, and then the next hole is supposed to, tee off 25 feet up and also go down 20 feet. It just doesn't really make sense in the topographic sense to have those kind of elevation changes right next to each other. So when I designed this, I did it with the concept in mind that I would have my lowland obviously down here along the coast, and it would slightly rise until I get to the foothills of the Andes Mountains up here, where the largest elevation change that you'll see on the course is really from 0 feet up to 50, but then the mountains will rise up. I do have, I wanted some water to be in play here. It is the Lakes District of Chile, which is an area where I believe it's 12 dominant lakes there. When you think about Chile, it's probably not the area that you would think of most. You might think of more of the desertous region, the northern end of Chile. Kind of the wine country there, just a little south of the desertous region. But I really liked the look of this in real life, and I'm hoping to emulate that here. So I do have 2 larger lakes and a smaller one with a river coming naturally as it would down the foothills of the mountains here, collecting in some basins, and then eventually running out into the ocean. Again, this is a good reference for me because it lets me know when I'm designing holes where the water is going to come into play, so I put it in properly, either around the greens, tee boxes, fairways, whatever it is, so that in the end, when I get into the designer, hopefully I will be able to match all this up. So we are designing hole 5 today. Hole 5, as I put it in my rough draft, is a 425-yard par 4, slight dogleg left. It is going to play downhill from about 45 feet all the way down to about 20 feet, maybe slightly above. One of the things to be aware when I'm designing this is that I do have this lake, and since all lakes are level, as water will level itself out, this whole lake is at 25 feet. Now it does have, how am I getting down from the mountains? I'm going to have a series of short to medium length waterfalls. I don't want the waterfalls themselves to be, what attracts the eye. But I don't want to mess with a lot of water planes in what will probably be a heavily planted a heavily planted course, because that will run into problems with my object meter. And I don't have a lot of experience making a stream like that, so I'm going to avoid that. So I will have a series of waterfalls. I have marked them out on my overall map where the large ones are, where there's going to be a large elevation change, somewhere usually between 3 to 10 feet. And so for here, there is this portion of river that will be playing in behind this green. It's also the river that went in behind number 1 green. As you can see, let me see if I can pull it up right here without really messing up anything. So as you can see from number 1, we do have our water over here on this side, and it is coming in behind the green. That's the same river that will feed into eventually, well, it doesn't feed into, the lake feeds it, but it eventually it originates from this lake here. So we are going to be playing downhill, but I want to be aware that at 25 feet up here, my land on this side needs to be at least a foot, but probably 2 feet higher than the 25 feet until I get to that area where I want to put that waterfall. It doesn't necessarily have to go exactly there, but when I get there, we can drop the elevation chain, or we can drop the elevation, and I can have my final green location down at the elevation that I want it. Again, it's one of those things that I wanted to get out of the way ahead of time, because once I get into Designer, I don't want to have to be messing around trying to match elevations and make water bodies work where I want them and make them make sense. You know, water collects in a basin. You know, it doesn't make sense for there to be a lake and then right on the side of it is a hole that's, 5 feet below it. I mean, you can do it. You can technically make it make sense, but it doesn't happen a lot of times in nature. So we're going to go with that and start with hole 5. Now, hopefully, again, like I said, these pencil marks show up. But what I've done right now is really just laid out the beginnings of what I know about the hole for a quote-unquote fact, what I've already created for myself. So I really just have some distances here with a straight line to mark out my 425 yards. I normally, when I'm designing a hole and I have a length in mind, I normally make my landing zones somewhere between 280 and 315 yards. That is for video game purposes only. I wouldn't be doing that, if I were designing a real life course, unless I was trying to design a pro course that I know they're going to put it out there. But if I was designing some, private country club course, my landing zones would probably be somewhere in the 250 to 280 range. And then I would probably have some safe spots, even lower than that, because us amateur golfers aren't putting it out there at 315 just every day. So what I'll normally do is, to my first landing spot, I will, measure out 300 yards. It's just a good even number for me. It's not something that I'm married to as far as that's where my turn is going to be, but it does give me a good starting point, especially when it comes to measuring out the distances. So for here, I went out to 300 first, and then 125 yards from there into the center of the green. And from there, I also have just a rough outline of where my water edge is going to potentially be. That just helps me remember my elevation that I need to design with and where I am eventually going to be able to drop this down. I do have some elevations marked, plus 45, plus 30, that's from sea level, plus 25. The green is going to be, almost even with the water behind it. And so right now it's marked at about plus 20, which means at some point I'm going to have a 5-foot drop off here and kind of have to figure out how I'm going to do that. And then I also keep in mind my direction that I'm playing. This doesn't necessarily come into play too often in my design, but it could potentially help me if I'm trying to think about lighting. If I'm having a setting sun to the west, my light is going to be coming in off the coast this way, which if I'm, putting trees or anything to the left here, on this hole in particular, could have some shadow effects. They could be good, or if I'm putting them around the green, like if you can maybe follow the shadow of my pencil, the trees could potentially obstruct the green with their shadow. So I do want to be aware of that. From the east, maybe a rising sun from the east. There are going to be mountains over on this side, so it may be dark until you get to maybe 9-10 o'clock. But the sun's going to be coming in, and it's just going to have a different effect and a different look on the hole. The big thing is I always want to put my wind direction on here as well. Right now my wind is blowing, like I said, off the ocean in the direction of northeast. And so I always want to make sure I have my wind, because when I'm designing, if you're designing in a vacuum, you can kind of forget a couple of things, and you can forget that wind comes into play when you get on the course, and suddenly you find that your short par 4 that maybe you didn't mean to be drivable, but it is a shorter hole, is suddenly very drivable with just a little bit of wind behind you. Or the 560 yard par 5 that you've designed, to be reachable in 2, you suddenly find that it's a 3-shot par 5 because it plays directly into the wind at the wind direction that you intended. So I want to be keeping that in mind, because when you are designing golf courses in real life, and I'm not one, but this is from what I've read, from what I've heard, you're going to take those natural weather features into mind. If you have a coastal hole and that wind is predominantly blowing, from the water onto the coast, you're going to take that into account when you're designing a hole, whether to make it more difficult or make it easier. So I want to do that as well, so that I can keep in mind, for example, we have a wind that's going to be slightly at our player's back, and it's going to be left to right. And so it's going to push balls a little farther. It's going to help a fade quite a lot, and a draw is going to fight against the wind. So even though it may be pushing, helping to push the ball a little bit, because it is fighting that draw, it could have the potential to knock that draw down, and so you're not going to get as much distance out of that draw as you would otherwise. In the game, designing for the game, a lot of people are playing the red fast, and that's just a natural draw on the ball. So I could be taking that into account here when I'm talking about the wind. I also want to be thinking about it when I'm talking about shots into the green and how that wind is going to affect any shots into the green. So that's what I have so far. And you guys are here with me at the very beginning. I don't have any ideas for this hole just yet beyond what I've already marked in terms of yardage and how it's going to play. So I may ramble on a little bit. I'm not used to talking to myself, but I'm going to try to, fill some silence here if there is, silent points, or there's parts where I just, need to trace something out. Might jump into a time lapse here. But first thing I want to do is take my compass here. I want to mark out my 100, 200, and maybe 250 yardages here, just to give me an idea of the kind of shots I'm looking at. If you can make out my scale, the scale of this hole is 1 inch is 30 yards. I forgot to mention one of my tools I also use. Good old calculator. My art brain does not function well with my math brain, and so even very simple math problems, I just find it easier to punch into the calculator. So please, while you're watching this, if I have to, divide 144 by 12, please don't get on to me for not immediately knowing that and punching into the calculator, because I will be coming back to the calculator often. So At 30 yards, because I'm drawing this to scale, if I want to make a 100-yard mark, it's going to be 3.3 inches. When it comes to the 0.3 inches, I usually ballpark that. We're looking at 3 1/3. Basically, rulers aren't measured in thirds; they're measured in quarters, eighths, sixteenths, but they're not measured in thirds. So, what I'll do is I'll just take my compass, go out to 3 inches, and there's 3 1/4, there's 3 1/2, somewhere in between, right there. Okay. And I know somebody's going there going, think about the fractions. There's a fraction of 16th or 8th that equals a third. Ugh. I'm sorry. I'm in art mode. I'm not in math mode. So we're gonna look at this. So I'm always designing from the back tees. I don't look at a lot of different possibilities from the different tees because I design for the game, and most people in the game are playing from the back tees. My other tees are functional. You're not going to have a bad round from them, but I'm not designing any of the features of the hole with those tees in mind. So I'll use my back tee here and just mark out a little 100-yard tick. Another for 200, and then I've already got my 300 yards marked out, but just give myself another arc here. I don't have to be totally exact while I'm doing this because things will change once I get into Designer anyways, but I do want to operate under some kind of scale because if you don't, when you hop into the Designer, things may not work out the way you want to. The fairways aren't as wide as you thought they were, or they're much wider than you thought they were. Green sizes, change a lot if you're not working with some kind of scale. And then sometimes what I'll also do is come back from the green and give myself a couple of marks at 100, and then again at 200. And that gives me an idea of landing zones and potential lengths for shots in. I do this before I design really the layout of the fairway or the green because I usually start with the green, and when I'm thinking about the green, I'm thinking about the kind of shots that the player is going to have into the green. And to do that, I need to know where the player is going to be landing and that distance of shot there. So, drawing those out gives me some sort of idea. I also like to mark a potential landing zone. Again, 270 to 315 yards is normally what I do. I think I said 280 actually. So, 280 divided by 30, 9.3 inches is where we'll have our first landing zone here. And then 315 is 10 and a half. Easy enough. I'm just going to flip that around. Ten and a half. So this is where we're looking for potentially the ball to land. Now this is also where you start thinking about wind. This is in basically not perfect conditions, but basically no conditions, no wind, and on a level fairway. And so if you hit 280, you're going to have some rollout. Depending on the fairway settings, you could roll anywhere from 10 yards to 20 yards or 30, or more, depending on slope and everything. So, but as a general rule of thumb, I will design my landing zones and then I'll add 15 yards on for roll. And I sometimes don't mark that, but I'm just aware. I'm actually using my drawing pencil right now. I'm just aware of where that rollout can occur. And then for wind, I won't really mark anything on the drawing for wind. I'm just keeping it in the back of my mind that I do have a northeast wind. It's going to push the ball forward and to the right. And, in this case, it's a danger because I have my lake over here, and the lake's going to run right alongside that landing zone. Now, for most players in this game, they're not hitting slow shots, or they're not hitting purposeful fades. So for the game itself, it's not necessarily a much of a hazard, but I do just try to design realistic courses. And in this case, for amateur golfers, or golfers that don't get quite a lot of practice, a fade or a slice is a shot that is hit often off the tee, at least for right-handed golfers. And so this could be a big danger area for some people. So with that in mind, let's take a look at this. Let's talk about the green here. And if we have a 315-yard rollout here, we're really looking at something could potentially be less than 100 yards. Could be out to about 120. And then if we're a little shorter hitter, or we don't catch all of it, it does have the potential to creep out to about 130 to 150, depending on where we land. So we're looking at something between a short wedge and a short iron. For those kind of shots, it's going to be important to keep up your accuracy. Accuracy is going to be the important factor there. And so we could potentially have a smaller green to give that player a smaller target to be more accurate with. A smaller green we could have a larger green, but just protected more on the sides to punish those errant shots. Thinking about it here for a minute, I've done a few squarish greens. I say a few, I've only done 4 holes. A couple that have tilted away left to right. This one's also going to be playing downhill. That's something else. Could potentially be playing, somewhere about 5 feet downhill. Could play 6 or 7 feet downhill, depending on how far up you go. So that's going to add an element there. So what I'm thinking is, since we're playing downhill, we're going to be able to have a good look here at the green. So I'm thinking I want to show off the green. So I want people to be able to see from the front to the back. And I really enjoy bunkers that, they have the flashing up the sides. And then they're higher in the back. If you've seen some of my drawings now that I've put in, my bunkers have basically a bulge or a ridge built up behind them that will be a landform that we'll have. And I like to do that behind the greens because it's also an easy way to make sure that your bunkers aren't hidden. You do have to be careful though, because you can get into sculpting bathtub bunkers. Not purposefully, but when you raise that land back there and then lower down some land for your bunkers, it does have the potential to pull that front side in as well. So you really have to be careful to keep that front side level so that you can have an even slope there. You don't want to have the U-shaped bathtub bunkers. You really want them to kind of come in and be flat. You want a little bit of a lip, but you don't want something, coming up that way. So I think, I think we'll have, a green that will tilt towards the player so that the bat can be raised. It'll be a little smaller than usual because I want a tight target. And I think I'm going to protect it in the rear with a couple of bunkers a couple of well-placed bunkers, and I think that'll look nice with the river running behind. You'll kind of get a nice downhill view of the green, some bunkering behind it, and the river behind that. And on the other side of the river is actually I believe, the number 3 green. And so let's take a look at our reference here. No, sorry, it's number 2 tee box. So we'll be able to look out. This is kind of where we're landing here and shooting our shot into the green. So we're going to be able to look downhill. We're going to have a little bit of a waterfall to our right, meandering river behind us. We'll be able to see the whole green, see the bunkering behind it, and then across to the fairway and actually get a good look down to the town and out to the ocean. So this should set us up pretty well for a nice little scenic view early on in the round. So got to design with that in mind. This one's got to be good. So like I said, I usually start with the green first, as I do in the designer when I'm not sketching out everything beforehand. B101, Canuck, and some other guys recommend starting green to tee because the green will tell you a lot about what you need from the hole in terms of how you need it to play, what kind of hazards you need to put in, what line of play you're protecting potentially. And so there's a lot you can find out about the hole that you may not know if you start designing around the green. So for this, I like to kind of get a rough estimate of the size of my green. So 1 inch equals 30 yards. So if I were to just do a 30 by 30, and it's going to be 900 square yards times 9 to give us square feet. That's not right, is it? So that's actually a fairly large green. You know, if you think about Pebble Beach's greens, average about, I think it was 3,600 square feet. I think the PGA average right now is about 6,000. And my other holes that I've designed so far have had fairly large greens, but it's because they've been tiered and they've been undulating. There's a lot going on with them, or at least there will be once I get into the designer. It may not translate over to the paper right now, but for this one though, since it's going to be smaller, I'm not going to have a lot of play in the green, I don't think. I think the challenge will be just getting onto the green for this one. So let's see, if we were to do 25, I always have to do this. I never just have these off the top of my head. So a 25 by 25 yard will give us a 5,625. So I think that gives us a good starting point. And I do want a fairly squarish green. We want to do, let's see, we said 25, so we got 1 inch equals 30 yards here. And so about a third there will give me kind of a good idea. The greens are sometimes hard to really draw to scale, even at this scale especially, and then transfer over to the designer. Because the designer doesn't have a grid system, sometimes I do build out a grid system using the measuring tool to help me design these greens, but sometimes there are some alterations that you have to make when you're doing that. But for now, we've got the basic size of our green here. We have the river down here. I know I want some bunkering in the back here to protect it. So I'm thinking that I really want to tilt this square that I've drawn here. I kind of want to tilt its axis. And I really want my green to be more kind of, not too square. I don't want it to look like a square, just square-ish. Maybe even little cut out there. Kind of like that. And, you know, a lot of times when I'm drawing these, the center of the green where I've put it won't be exactly where it ends up as I've drawn the green. That's fine. The measurements that I have are going to change anyways, because wherever you put your pin, that'll be, you know, well, on the scorecard, wherever you put your initial pin will be how far the hole is, will be the distance for the hole. But as you play it, whatever pin you put in there is going to change the distance that it shows up for the player. So I don't worry too much about that. So I have this here. You know, I'll go back and I'll check my measurements again. So I've actually made this a little larger. It's about 30 yards deep. And at its widest point, it's another 30. But I've pinched it in here at the front of the green and the back of the green. And so I'm fine with the depth and the width of the green being 30 yards because I've pinched it in here, which is going to take off some of that square footage. And then after I've done that, I do make a note on the side here just to remind me of my green size for when I do the green detail drawing. So green size, we'll just say basically 30 by 30. It just helps me there because I don't normally mark that on the drawing itself. Erase some of these extraneous lines here. And then I think with that, you know, we kind of have a natural place to put our bunkers. You know, if we want to have a look at them, put our bunkers here. This is really protecting long shots. So, you know, designing for the game, not a lot of players will hit too terribly long, especially on their short wedge shots in. But this particular hole will have the wind going back this direction will be, you know, more directly from left to right. And depending on the kind of shot they're playing, it could have the potential to push that ball a little further, and it's going to naturally push that ball to the player's right. And so when we have some bunkering here to the right, that's going to be an element of danger here. And so, you know, we've kind of protected the right the whole way down with the water here. Not necessarily protected the right, but we've added hazards here for a shot hit right. And so I don't want to, you know, I could add another bunker down here in the front, but I think having it long and right is fine. I want to add just a small one up here to kind of protect against those maybe fast shots, kind of get away from the player. And then, you know, it's a small green, so my bunkers aren't overly large, but I do like to protect against not protect against, but punish. Yeah, this is going to be a penal bunker. Sorry. Punish against a short miss down here. So this one's going to be a little larger than the others. I don't expect a lot of players to be in this one, but if you do have a, you know, front left pin position, even with a short iron, perhaps you overestimate the wind and you're aiming out here to the left, hoping that the wind is going to carry you in. And you come up short. Now you're in the bunker with not a lot of green to work with. You've short-sighted yourself, which can be you know, harsh. But I couple that with it's a short shot to begin with. It's shorter shots are generally easier shots, so it's a shorter shot. So if I've short-sighted you on the green in a bunker, sorry, but as long as you haven't gone on the water off the tee box, you're still 2 shots in to make a bird, or to make a par. So it's punishing in that you've maybe lessened your chances for a birdie, but par I think is still manageable. Now from here, in these bunkers, since we're going to have our green going downhill, not downhill, but slightly back towards the player, pitching or splash shot out of the sand here could potentially be dangerous if we have some slopage in our green. If we have a pin back here, for example, and we have some sloping, if you overshoot that, you could potentially run down. And depending on how much of a slope that is, maybe you run down to the front of the green. I don't think that I'm going to design my greens contours to be that punishing, but it is an element that if you go long, you're going to be punished for it. And I don't mean punished as in I don't try to create penal bunkers. I do try to create bunkers that make a player say, hey, I don't want to go there, or that's obviously a warning to me not to try that side, or it's a it's a beckoning call. It's a come on, I dare you kind of thing out there. I don't want them to think, oh man, there's no reason for that bunker other than if I slightly mishit my shot, now I'm hitting out of the sand. I don't want that kind of reaction. So put these here. So, in that case, we're going to have, a little bit of mounding behind these. As I said, I like the look of flashing the sand. And so I kind of draw in those mounds to give me an idea of where some of my slopes may be. So it looks like, in the green here, we're going to have, some downhill here. And then since we've raised it back here, we could have a potential to have some in that way. And then, I could play into the land coming in this way by having almost a little bit of a funnel here where the land will kind of slope down this way, and then coming off the back of the ridge here will also slope this way and kind of funnel back towards the front of the green, which I think could make for some very interesting shots if you are potentially maybe trying to run one up onto the green. Maybe you're intentionally hitting short to try and catch this little bit of a ridge here, even though the green for the most part is sloping from the back down to the player. There's still going to be some right to left play in it on this side. So you could maybe want to try to roll it down this hill and get to a short pin here. Or if you, again, hit a bad shot, maybe out of the bunker, or you hammer hand a putt and you go past the hole, that could punish you, even more. And I think on a for the game, a shorter par 4 with a relatively short approach, I think adding those sort of elements to the green is what's going to add interest and skill requirements to the hole. If you don't have anything like this going on, it really is just a drive and a pitch, and you have too many just drive and a pitch holes. Sometimes a hole, that's all you can do. Sometimes not every hole needs to be number 12 at Augusta. Not every hole needs to be 17 at Sawgrass. You're not going to have those kind of knee knocking holes all 18. It would drive your players mad. So sometimes you do need a breather, and but you can't have on the other side of that, you can't have 18 breathers throughout the round either. It just gets extremely boring. So I think we have a good idea about our green here. From there, I think about landing zones and where I'm playing into this green. And I think on this one, I haven't really brought the water too much into play so far in the first 4 holes that I've designed. And so I think I really want this one to play. The way I've designed it, this side of the lake will be mostly without trees, and the far side of the lake, where the last hole I designed, number 4, plays next to, does have some trees lining it. And so, from the tee box here at 45 feet up, playing down to what this is 25, you're going to get a real good look at that water down there. And I want you to take a look at it. I want you to be thinking about it, even though your natural swing may be a red fast, and so you're not really worried about going right. If you think that you're going to put it over here and try to hug that right hand line to give you the best look in, and you've been playing your red fast all day, and you get up there and you think, I can cut it close because I know that my shot is going to come back left. I hope it's in the back of your mind that you hit a little bit of a slow and you're coming up short, and you're going to be in the drink and taking another one off the tee. Well, I guess not off the tee, just potentially, depending on where the game puts you. But I want players to think about that. And so I think I want, a tighter fairway than most here. Again, also because it's a short approach in. I want to reward a player for navigating as close to the water and up to a tighter fairway as possible and getting as short an approach shot as possible. I want to reward them for that. But I also want to leave, enough room for players that don't want to try. They don't want to mess with the water. I'm aiming away from the water. I'm not going in. They have enough room to lay up or hit a shorter shot and still have, it's still going to be a shortish approach in, but they have a different angle in. So as narrow as I get my fairways, I try not to have anything that I intend to be played on any less than 20 to 25 yards. I think that's, like US Open fairway width. So I don't like to design for anything tighter than that. I think it doesn't look good in the designer. I think when you step up to a hole that's got a 20-yard wide fairway, it just doesn't look right, and that has really to do with the perspective and the field of view of the game and all that. But it just doesn't look correct. But before we go on there, I'll have to cut this part out. But dog needs to go out, so we will be right back. Okay, so I have actually skipped ahead a little bit. This video is already, I think, probably right now going to be close to an hour at this point, so it's easier for me to draw this out first and then explain kind of my process from where we stopped. So, we were talking about where we're going to be hitting our approach shots from, and then, how we get there is obviously going to be the drive. So this hole, because it's going to play a little bit short in game standards, I did want to make accuracy paramount here. So the fairway is tightened up here. It is about 25 yards. And that distance out is roughly about 315, actually it's a little less than 315 yards out. So there is potential to land and roll out a little bit if you can keep the ball in the fairway. There is also potential for a mishit, and this lake is going to be running up the side here. Fairly close. I want to keep it a few yards off, but lake's going to be in play on the tee shot. And so, with that, there may be some players that say, it's too tight. I don't want to try that. I'm going to lay back a little bit, and I wanted to give them a wide enough zone to do that. If we take a measurement here, we have 1 inch and let's just call it 1 2/3 inches And so, we're looking at 45 plus 7.5. We're looking at about 53 yards in width. I'm not going exact measurements here, even though I'm trying to draw to scale, again, because you get in the designer and some things are going to have to change, either just because you want them to or because the way the designer works, it just dictates that the fairway is not going to be exactly where you put it the whole way down your initial design. So I wanted to give him a wide enough area here where the less adventurous players or the players that aren't playing the longest clubs or the newer players that just don't hit it as far can still have a safe place to land where they can challenge the water if they feel like it. But I did want to add, a little bit of, risk to that shot. You can almost call it a punishment for laying up. I didn't want it to be a punishment, but I wanted to make players think, okay, if I go long, it's a tighter fairway. I'm bringing the water into play. If I lay up, it's a wider fairway. But if I do hit my red fast or I hit it too much, I could bring these bunkers, these fairway bunkers into play that I've put out here. So, I want to make people, weigh the risks and rewards here. In my eyes, the reward here is a shorter approach shot in, a better angle into the green. And the risks are obviously, missing the fairway on either side. Playing out of the rough may not be as bad, but bringing water into play, going OB, is always a terrible thing to do. And then, from this one, my risk is, really just these fairway bunkers, but also a mishit, although it's mitigated a lot by the width of the fairway. And my reward, there's not a lot of reward for it. The reward is just a safer landing area. You have a longer approach shot in, you have a different kind of angle here, and the wind, instead of playing directly left to right, could potentially be playing more at your back, and so affect the distance of your shot a little more than it would if you were a little closer and playing from a different angle. So that's how I'm justifying that. In the comments, tell me if I'm correct or not. And then, thinking about it as I got going, there are players out there that, they're not going to play at my default wind, and they're not going to play at my default wind speed. And so I like to create situations for them playing on different settings that I may not intend, to have some different shots available as well. So there may be some that they have the wind directly at their back, or maybe it's a little more favorable right to left. They may feel they have a chance to kind of cut off a lot of this hole, as short as it is already. They're going to make it even shorter by going for this far side of the fairway here as it wraps around. And so I wanted to create a little bit of risk here in that area by adding these two smallish fairway bunkers, just to give them some hesitation. Now these bunkers are out at just past 315, so they're probably about 320 and maybe 325 from the tee. But we're playing downhill. We're playing with wind at our back, and so there is a good potential for some players to try to poke one out here. And I want to give players an opportunity to have fun, and it's fun to cut down a hole and take a route that's not maybe the necessarily intended route. And I don't want to punish that too much, but I just want to make them think and weigh the risk themselves. So we have these two fairway bunkers out here. For my course here, I intend for there to be no light rough. There will be no tee boxes. The tee boxes will be fairway. Fairway will be fairway, and the fairway will go around all of the greens. There's not going to be any light rough. There also won't be any fringe on the green, because lately when I've been designing, I just go without fringe because I don't like the way the fringe color clashes a lot of times with what else is going on in the textures. So the fairway will go all around here. I'm leaving ample room in the back for a potential miss, but what I do want is for this to kind of be a hollow back here, even if it's just a couple of feet. I want this to a ball that's mishit, hit far, and rolls off where the green is slightly raised, to roll back down, so that now you're pitching up to a green that's going to roll away from you. It's going to add a little bit more of that punishment for a mishit, a badly hit ball. Since a badly hit ball here, unless you're slamming it, it's not going to go in the water. The worst thing you're going to be doing is playing out of the rough if you miss these two bunkers. So I don't want to give just an easy shot back in with this short of an approach to begin with. Other than that, that's kind of our look here. Now, when I'm designing these holes, even though I lay out my waypoints kind of like you would in the designer, when I start putting in the fairway, those points don't always add up. Obviously, as you can see here, if I had this fairway in the designer, my waypoint at 300 yards would probably be closer to the middle here. So your player's looking more in that direction and less in this direction. In this, on the paper, I don't care about that. I'm going to draw in my intended routes anyways, so I don't care where this is. So when it comes to the designer, this hole, even though I've designed it at 425, it may come out to 430, it may come out to 440, it may come out shorter, as will all the other holes. That just happens. As long as it's not a huge drastic change from how I initially designed it, I'm fine with that. I can work with that. It's not going to change a whole lot, plus or minus 5 yards here and there. So now is the time I kind of get into the nitty gritty details. You could, if you're doing this, if you're designing a hole, you could stop here. You have your fairway, you have your hazards, you have your green. You kind of know what your green is sloping like. You have your elevations at some different points. So you have a pretty good idea about what your hole is going to look like once you get in the designer. So you could stop here. But I do like to add a little bit of detail into this. One, because it also functions as kind of a piece of art at the end of it, which is nice to have. But it also, for me, gives me that much more of a reference whenever I get into the designer, what I intended. Because I'm designing this hole now. Today is April 1st, and I may not get into the designer to start this, for another couple of weeks. And so I may forget some things that I intended this hole to do when I get into the designer, and then all of a sudden I'm looking at it going, well, this doesn't make sense. What was I thinking? So this is where I start adding my contour lines, detail work such as the trees, and like that. And so for that, I'm going to sketch that out here. We'll go into a time lapse for that, and we'll come back after that's done. Okay, so I'll go over a little bit about what I did there. Hopefully you'll be able to see at least a little bit of the detail, even if you can't maybe read some of the writing. One thing I forgot to mention back before we started the time lapse is I did go ahead and put in my 3 other tees here. I have the yellow championship tees in the back. Then I normally go blue, white, and red. And so I put those in. Normally, I like the blue tees to play, in the championship-esque. They would be what I would think I would play if I were actually playing the course. The white tees are a little easier, and the red tees are for the beginner, amateur player, maybe those that don't hit the ball as far. So, this one will play at 425, down to 410 for the next set of tees, down to 390. Both these play a little bit to the left of the championship tees to kind of give them a little more room to work with, a little bit of a different look into the landing zone. And then the red tees will play at 365 over here. And while I did move them over to the right, that's really more for design purposes. I don't want anything sticking out here because our other hole is actually going to be coming up this way. So they're a little bit closer. 45 feet up from sea level here, playing down to about 30 at this point. And then about 25, 26, we still want the land raised a little bit so that it makes sense with the lake here. And then on down. I went ahead and made my green detail as well. When I do this, I'm trying to just roughly draw a larger portion. Normally what I do is I will scale this one up to where whatever my scale is, I scale it up to 4 inches. So in this case, instead of 1 inch equals 30 yards, 4 inches will equal 30 yards, so that each of my greens are scaled to a 4-inch scale. It just makes it a larger view. I can get more of the contour details in here than if I were simply going off of the smaller drawing. So I know I said I wasn't going to have a whole lot of play in this green, but the elevation changes are fairly subtle. At least they may not be on paper. Again, taking it from paper to the designer, there's going to be some things either lost in translation or some things that will just show up differently. A foot elevation change in the designer, depending on how long of a approach that is, or how along what length that is going to give you a different colored slope. My intention is to try and avoid any red on any of my greens. I'm going to design the greens at 187 so that I know for a fact if they're slowed down that there's not going to be any red and you can't speed them up anymore. So there may be a little red in places, but I really want to, with this course, play with the orange and yellow slopes. A lot of people complain because in the designer, it's very easy to create a red slope when you're using, the flatten tool or you're using the raise tool. Even when you're using a fuzzy brush or something like that, it's easy to get those red slopes because that land will just raise up very quickly and kind of get away from you if you're not careful. And it can take a lot to really even out those slopes. A lot of times you'll just see a big stripe of of a red slope on a green, and then you'll have your green lines leading up to it and your green lines leading away from it, and then everything in between is red because the designer, and I'm guilty of this, like anyone probably is, or at least was, a designer either didn't take the time to or couldn't find that way to fine tune and flatten that out long enough to give a gradual slope down. And no one likes to play where they're having to hit every putt over or up a red slope. And so I really want to practice getting these gradual slopes where there's going to be some orange and there's going to be some yellow, but you're going to get up there, and from your approach, you may look at it and you go, oh, this, there's not a whole lot to this green. But then when you get up there and you line up your putt and you see the actual amount of undulations on there because they were kind of hidden behind that yellow and that orange color, and you didn't really take them into account because you didn't see any red, you're going to find that a yellow slope and a orange slope are more than enough to have to force a player to compensate left or right for those. So that's my intention with this. So when I talk about these contours on my green, you may look at them and you go, okay, well, the front of the green's at plus 19, back of the green's at plus 22, 3 foot difference across a 30 yard green here. It may not be much. It may be too much. I have to get into the designer and play around with it, and that's where things change. But basically, kind of as we talked about when we're doing the small scale, we have our waterfall, over this way, and so the land is sloping from the upper lake down this way, so slightly higher on the right hand side as we come into the middle. So we got like a 19 up to 19 and a half, up to 20, up to 22. So this one's really going to have to be a gradual slope to avoid that red. 21 feet over here. So everything is playing down and back to the middle, down and funneling away. When you're talking about the sand, the back of the bunkers are going to be raised. And so you're normally going to be playing, out of the front side here. If you're in the sand and you're having these circles here represent my potential pins for this. This is, I would say, maybe the easiest one, but it's still a challenge, because if you get above the hole, there's potential to run off, even though it's half a foot, it's 6 inches down. There's still some potential there. And then if you end up on either side of it, again, not only do you have you're going from 20 feet down to 19 and a half, so another 6 inches, but you also have, again, that break back towards the front of the green. So, you're hitting a left to right putt here, a right to left putt here, a downhill sloping putt here. But that would probably, if I was doing these in order, like a 1 is the easiest, and the number a 4 pin is Sunday pin, I'd probably put this one at a 1. I'd put this one at a 2, because you're in between the bunkers here. You do have to get to the far end of the green. You do have some risk of running off into the hollow here. This is just a grassy hollow, so you're not running into any bunker, but it is going to be heavy rough. So you will have to chip up and onto a location where, again, you're going from 21 and a half down to 20. A 1.5 foot drop. And that 20 may be, closer to over here, so I can have a more gradual slope, but it's still kind of drastic. Not to mention that it's also sloping from the back down to here, from 22 feet down to 21 feet. Then number 3, I would probably put my number 3 pin here. It's tucked away in a corner. You have sand long. You have if you come up short a bit, you could run back. It's not going to be as drastic as some other areas, but you also are leaving yourself with an uphill putt at the very worst. So it's not the worst place to miss, but you do have to worry, because if you hit it long and you're pitching out of the sand back here, you have very little to work with in terms of room. Now, when I get into the designer, if this doesn't work out, if I find out this is way too short, there's no way, I'm only 2 boxes off the green or something like that, I'll move this in and make some compensations. But that's the difficulty potential there. If I'm over in this way, it's the same deal. I got very little green to work with, and potential is high that I pitch this past, and now I'm no helping myself. I got to roll down and hit an uphill putt to get back and hopefully save par. Anything you're missing right approaching that pin, you're only messing with some heavy rough over here. So danger is not necessarily the name of the game there, but it is still a difficult pitch back up to that pin. This would probably be my number 4 pin. It's sandwiched between the front bunker and the back left bunker here. Because the back side of this bunker is raised and elevated, it's going to be a partially blind pin. I don't want it to be too blind. The back of this this is raised up 21 feet from the front here at plus 19. So this ridge here may only be at 22 feet or 21 and a half. It'll partially hide your landing area as you're looking at it from your approach shot. So then you have to navigate, and you got to land between these two bunkers here. Now you may be coming in from a different approach, from more along this side, as you can see here. If we are able to poke our drive out to this way, we may not have to worry so much about that left-hand bunker here. But any shot that comes up short, or it's not powerful enough, we miss hit, something like that, wind's playing in a different direction, that front bunker could still come into play. And then you have the same difficulties going long. You're putting back downhill. If you're pitching from the left side, it's a short pitch. It'd be better, even if you're going from this pin on the left, it'd be better to miss right, because you got a lot more green to work with coming back onto it. So those are the kind of details that I work out on my green detail map. And then from here, I have basically my hole. So from here, what I do is I go back in and I start the inking process, and that's basically just tracing. And that's really just to add some detail to the work. It's not anything that's going to add anything that I can take into the designer, but it does give me a better look at things. At the end of it, I can have a drawing that looks like this, where I can look at it from very quickly and not have to make out pencil marks, eraser marks, things like that. The detail's crisp, and it will help me when I get into the designer, when I start using this as a reference point, to be able to see that and go quickly back and forth. And it does add some artistic element to it. Like I said, at the end of this, even if I have a terrible course, at least I'll have 18 drawings that I can be proud of. So I'm going to go ahead and start inking this, and I will hit the time lapse and play a little music, and we'll see you at the end. All right, and there we have it. Some details I go back in later and do, like if I'm going to mark where I'm, going to have some scrub brush or things like that. I will put in there, along the lines of the first hole I did. You can see some of these dotted lines here are marking where I intend to have some low plants. Other things I do mark on there are trees. The tree shapes have no bearing on what kind of trees I intend to use. I won't really know that until I get into the designer. So they're not necessarily going to be these big, deciduous trees like you might think, like an oak or a maple or something that they kind of look like from a top-down view. I also mark the water line with what I intend to just be planting along the water line. You know, it looks kind of like a row of hedges or something, but it's basically just water plants, grasses, and low shrubs and things like that. Waterfall, if I have one in the area. I mark the sand. I just do little dots to kind of give a shadow effect and some detail in there. So they're a little more obvious that they're bunkers and not just like holes in the fairway or things like that. And then the contour lines, I do use little hash marks, and then I will use a solid line along the high side so that I know which side I intend to be the high side, so I know what direction everything is sloping. So, you know, our final hole here, I have started naming the holes after courses that Alister MacKenzie designed, but aren't necessarily his most famous designs. I mean, everybody knows Cypress, everybody knows Augusta, everybody knows Royal Melbourne, but hopefully, you know, he was fairly prolific during his time, especially in his native England. And so there's a lot of courses out there that are Alister MacKenzie designed that people, you know, haven't heard of and have certainly never played. So hoping to draw a little attention to a couple of those. This one's name is going to be Crowborough, although I'm sure that in good old London town they pronounce it something silly like Crowborough. I don't know. But for me, here in good old Texas, it's Crowborough. And then I mark my yardages here from the championship, which I unfortunately misspelled, but that's one good thing that a Sharpie can do for you. Championship tees, 425 from the blues, it's 410 from the white, 390, and from the red, 365. Again, when I get into designer, most of this will change slightly, you know, give or take a few yards, and it will obviously change whenever you play it based on the pin position, but this gives me a good jumping on point whenever I do get into designer and start laying out waypoints and things like that. So I hope that you enjoyed it. It went a little longer than I thought it might, but it does give you kind of a inside view of just how long something like this takes. I wouldn't do it unless it helped me. It gives me a blueprint whenever I get into designer that I wouldn't have otherwise. There are lots of great designers out there that can hop in, throw down a plot, and just start thinking it out and going along the way. I've done that a couple of times, but it just never comes out as good as when I have a detailed plan going in. Sometimes that plan is only a couple of holes. You know, I have a couple of hole designs that I'll throw down some paper, and then we'll figure it out the rest of the way. But for this one, because it is a contest course and it is my first full-fledged 18-hole contest course, I really wanted to make sure that I gave myself the best opportunity to design a good course once I get into designer and not get hung up on trying to fit a certain hole here or make a water plane work in some way. So there'll be more to come. 5 holes down, 13 to go. And I may put out another video. Maybe I'll film it, but I won't have any talking. Maybe I'll just do a time-lapse video. Maybe try to keep it, you know, to 15 to 20 minutes. But for any of those that were interested in my process, not only, you know, drawing, but also thinking out my plots and my hole designs and kind of talking to myself about the strategy, at least when you see it in person, whenever I get it out for the contest, you won't be able to say, well, I wonder what he was thinking on this hole. Whether or not my strategic thoughts are justified in the end, I don't know. Some crazy person will probably find some way to play this hole where it just makes it seem like, you know, a 5-year-old designed it and what's the fuss. But for me, I do like to think that most of my design decisions in the game do come from some sort of strategic justification on my end. So until next time, I bid you a sweet adieu. And when the world's got you down and you're feeling bombed out, remember, just keep glowing. Play me off, Sam.